Hamas has ended its silence following the death of its leader, Yahya Sinwar. On Friday, Hamas's deputy leader, Khalil al-Hayya, confirmed Sinwar's death but vowed to keep fighting. He added that Hamas will not release any more hostages until Israel withdraws its troops from Gaza. Eliminating Sinwar has apparently not triggered a rethink inside Hamas. Meanwhile, the Israeli military says that it killed Sinwar in an operation in Rafah on Wednesday.
The Israeli military released this drone footage that it says shows Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar shortly before he was killed. Covered in dust and injured during an operation by the Israeli army, he throws an object at the drone. The IDF said Sinwar was trying to flee from house to house in Rafah when they targeted him.
For the past year, Sinwar tried to escape justice. He failed. We said we would find him and bring him to justice, and we did it.
Sinwar's body was brought to the Center for Forensic Medicine in Tel Aviv, where his identity was confirmed. His killing is seen as a significant victory for Israel, with people in several cities taking to the streets to celebrate his death.
Well, this is not the end of the war in Gaza. It's the beginning of the end. To the people of Gaza, I have a simple message. This war can end tomorrow. It can end if Hamas lays down its arms and returns our hostages.
But many in Gaza do not believe Sinwar's killing will end the war.
Israel has been assassinating the Palestinian leadership for decades, and assassinating Sinwar will not end the war.
It is true that this might raise Netanyahu's political clout, but it won't stop the resistance. It won't stop Palestinians from continuing their resistance and for their right to self-determination.
Back in Israel, news of Sinwar's death brings uncertainty for families of the hostages and their supporters.
Look, I think that all the terrorists eventually have a replacement. There's never a vacuum. There will always come someone instead.
Nobody is really know what it's going to be tomorrow, in the next few hours, in the next week, because this was a really game-changing.
Many Israelis are calling on the government to use Sinwar's death as an opportunity to bring an end to the conflict and to bring their loved ones home.
Sinwar's death has sparked reactions around the world. U.S. President Joe Biden called it an opportunity to seek a path to peace in Gaza. European leaders have echoed Biden's call for a ceasefire.
The death of this man, Yahya Sinwar, is front-page news around the world. And in Brussels, the assessment of his legacy is clear.
Sinwar was the leader of a terrorist organization, the terrorist organization of Hamas, and he was basically the mastermind behind the 7th of October with the killings, the massacres, the rapes and the kidnapping. So his death is certainly significantly weakening Hamas.
Across town at NATO headquarters, DW asked what the news means for the Western military alliance.
Has there been an assessment as to how this death will impact the fight for terrorism that could very well affect NATO allies, if not the alliance's own efforts?
I will not personally miss him. Obviously, the wider question of terrorism, NATO is, of course, vigilant in making sure that the alliance stays safe, and terrorism is a particular point of attention for the alliance. We are not involved as an alliance in the Middle East.
The more pressing question for leaders in Europe is what Sinwar's death means for the Middle East and whether it could open a new path to peace.
This opportunity must be seized so that all the hostages can be released and to ensure the war finally ends. It's imperative that military operations cease and that from now on, after this result, a ceasefire in Gaza is accepted and a credible political perspective for Israelis and Palestinians alike is finally opened.
But while European leaders call for a change of course, military officials remain sceptical.
I doubt it will change a lot because Hamas is able to replace leaders with other personalities. And my concern is that the situation will not be turned to the better by actions like this.
Calls for ceasefires and de-escalation have done little to shift the dial in the Middle East so far. The question is if European diplomacy after Sinwar's death can make any difference at all.
Well, for more, I'm joined by Natasha Hall. She's a senior fellow with the Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. It's good to have you on the program again. You know, when you and I last spoke about 24 hours ago, there had been no response from Hamas to the death of Sinwar. Now, that changed today, but the messaging from Hamas, as well as from the Israeli Prime Minister, it seems to be just more of the same, as if Sinwar's death could just be collateral damage in an ongoing war. How do you read it?
Well, thank you for having me again, Brent. Yes, I would just reiterate pretty much exactly what I said yesterday, which is that this doesn't change very much. Both Benny Gantz and Bibi Netanyahu have both pretty much immediately said that this doesn't end the war. Hamas came out publicly saying that they are still insisting upon a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops. Mm-hmm. So we are exactly where we were just a few days ago. So once again, the decapitation of one leader does not sort of destroy the entire reason for the conflict in the first place.
Do we have an idea, though, of how big of a blow this death is or will be to Hamas?
That part is unclear. We do know that Mohammed Sinwar, Sinwar's brother, was very close to him on the battlefield as well. So he might take up the helm as the battlefield leader. And then we might see others who are outside of the country sort of taking on the role of negotiations if they ever get started again. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's clear that Hamas has been significantly degraded. The question is, does that really change anything for whatever the day after may hold in this really brutal conflict?
U.S. President Biden was here in Berlin today. It was a farewell visit to his European and NATO friends. And it's been reported as a man closing out a career as well as an entire era in geopolitics. Rather solemn. Some people have even said sad. When Biden said that he sees Sinwar's death as a potential turning point, a unique opportunity to negotiate a ceasefire with Hamas, it makes sense rationally. But will it make a difference in the world post-Biden?
No, and I think this administration, but frankly other administrations too, have really had trouble kind of reading the global room. Right now, most of the world at least sees U.S. complicity in a really destructive war that has caused enormous civilian suffering and really discredited the United States as a leader in human rights or international norms. And so I do think it's a very solemn moment because we still have the war going on in Ukraine, not to say that is President Biden's fault, but we do have this continuing war in Gaza and now in Lebanon and Yemen. And there just doesn't seem to be any end in sight. We can't even begin to talk about the day after as a result before he ends his presidency. So I do think it's a very solemn moment and a particular moment of failure for this president.
And is it striking to you that when leaders meet to talk about the Middle East, they also inevitably end up talking about the war in Ukraine, as if the two conflicts are connected? I mean, there's a nexus there. I mean, do you see that as well?
Yeah, again, this goes back to my original point about it's very difficult for this White House to read the global room. The rest of the world sees parity with what Israel and what Russia is doing. And this White House simply does not see that. So when, President Biden and the White House are really urging allies outside of Europe, of course, to support the United States and NATO in its efforts in Ukraine, they simply point to what the United States is supporting with Israel in Gaza and Lebanon and elsewhere, and they really wonder what the difference is, because this one feels much closer to home for many people around the world.
You know, we're just a couple of weeks away from the U.S. presidential election. I mean, do you see in either candidate, Trump or Harris, signs of an ability to better read the global room if they do win the White House, and obviously will be confronted with the Middle East crisis?
I mean, I think the biggest tragedy here is that any administration will be contending with U.S. domestic politics and Israeli domestic politics. And that, at the end of the day, has been sort of the biggest impediment to finding a solution to this. If you can't talk about a problem honestly, then it's very, very difficult to solve it. And so whether it's a Trump administration or a Harris administration, I think there will be some daylight between the two, especially on this conflict. They will still be dealing with all of those same obstacles that previous politicians have had to deal with. And with an even more intransigent Netanyahu, who, you know, by the way, sees his political survival in this. And I think the question for a lot of people, including Israelis probably, is how many people have to die for one man's political survival.
That's right. That's right. And the hostages have still not come home, all of them, at least. Natasha Hall from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Natasha, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us on this Friday evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coverage continues now with Kirstine Roenn. She's from the Middle East Center at the London School of Economics. It's good to have you with us tonight. We have heard a lot of speculation that Sinwar's death may provide an opportunity for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Does it make a path to peace, in your opinion, more or less likely?
That's very hard to answer right now, and it depends in part on who will replace Yahya Sinwar. It also depends on Israel's strategic decisions going forward. Netanyahu has already been out saying that the war in Gaza is not over with Sinwar's killing. We need to also remember there's a war in Lebanon now between Hezbollah and Israel that has been escalating dramatically over the past weeks. Hezbollah has said they're willing to enter into negotiations about a ceasefire in Lebanon when a ceasefire in Gaza has been agreed on. But again, ceasefire negotiations in Lebanon won't be easy, even if there's a ceasefire in Gaza, because they involve difficult and sensitive questions concerning Hezbollah's role and their position in Lebanon, questions that will likely take a long time to negotiate.
And how do you think Sinwar's death will change Israel's or impact Israel's strategy towards Iran? Iran, which is Hamas's main backer, as well as Iran's Lebanese proxy Hezbollah. I mean, does it provide Israel with an opportunity to signal that it's ready to end the fighting?
Well, that's a very good question. And one of the things that make this question very difficult to answer is that we don't know what Israel's goals are in Lebanon at the moment. We know it's a separate war goal for Israel now to be able to return the citizens who've been displaced from northern Israel, but we don't know exactly what that entails. And there seems to be quite some disagreement amongst Israeli officials about that question. And if we turn to Iran, there's a question about the Israeli retaliation attack after Iran's missile attack on Israel. We still haven't seen this retaliation attack. And of course, the question is when that will come and how forceful it will be. So it remains very much open as it is now.
And what about Iran? I mean, how big of a blow is Sinwar's death for Iran and its ability to project power in the Middle East?
Well, in a way, one could say that the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran was a bigger blow for Iran because it happened on Iranian soil. But that being said, the killing of Yahya Sinwar is, of course, a symbolic and a moral blow, not just for the Palestinian part of the resistance axis, but also for the entire resistance axis altogether. How much it will affect the military capability of the axis, that's more of a question. I don't think it'll affect the military capabilities as much as it will affect the axis morally and symbolically.
You know, we've seen Sinwar's death has had very little influence on Israel's conduct of the war so far. What do you think leaders here in Europe, leaders in the United States, what should they be doing now to make his death an opportunity for peace?
Well, if there is indeed a window of opportunity for a ceasefire negotiation in Gaza in the first place, one thing the international community could do, and here I'm talking about the US and their allies in Europe, is of course to pressure Israel to accept a ceasefire proposal. But if we look at the conflict so far, it's quite evident that the US and their allies haven't really been able to pressure Israel to do much. We saw that with the proposed pause in fighting between Israel and Hezbollah, where Israel went out and rejected the proposal almost as soon as it was laid on the table. So again, we shouldn't be too hopeful that the international community and the leaders of the US and Europe will be able to push Israel to accept a ceasefire negotiation anytime soon.
You know, we're ending a week where the volatility level in the Middle East has just skyrocketed. And now you add, in a couple of weeks, we have the US presidential election. Is it even possible to calculate or to predict how the outcome of that election will impact what is happening in the Middle East?
Well, that's very hard to predict. But one prediction is that Israel is trying to gain as much as it can before the outcome of the election has been determined, because they know that an election and a new American administration might be an obstacle for them to achieve the military goals that they've set forth. Okay.
Anna, Kirstine Roenn, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We appreciate your insights tonight. Thank you. Well, now that Israel has killed Yahya Sinwar, attention is turning to who might become the militant group's next leader. Now, among the possible successors are Sinwar's brother, Mohammed, as well as the Hamas deputy leader, who today confirmed Sinwar's death.
Allahu Akbar. Friday prayers for Yahya Sinwar in Gaza. The deaths of Sinwar and other Hamas commanders leave the militant group leaderless. While much of Gaza lies in ruins, thousands of its fighters are thought to be still active and ready to take on Israeli ground forces. So who could now fill the vacuum at the top of Hamas? Among those tipped to replace Sinwar is his deputy Khalil al-Hayya, who confirmed the killing. He previously led the Hamas delegation at talks which failed to secure a ceasefire with Israel. Another contender is Khalid Meshal, seen here returning to Gaza for the first time in 45 years. He led Hamas for more than a decade until 2017, after surviving a poisoning attempt by Israeli agents in the 1990s. Rarely seen in public is Mohammed Sinwar, on the right in this video released by Israel, the brother of Yahya Sinwar, who was assassinated this week. Mohammed Sinwar is also on Israel's wanted list and has survived several attempts on his life. A fourth possibility is the 79-year-old hardliner Mahmoud al-Sahar, known as the General for his uncompromising views on Israel. Israel says it was this tank attack which killed Yahya Sinwar in Rafah. No matter who takes over Hamas, Israel's Prime Minister has made it clear the war will not be over until all the hostages held by Hamas in Gaza return home.
Well, journalist Balig Sladeen joins me now from Tel Aviv. Balig, good to see you. Hamas saying that it's going to keep on fighting against Israel. Israel's prime minister has also vowed to keep up the war. Now, this in stark contrast to what we heard from U.S. President Biden, who says that Sinwar's death is a unique opportunity to achieve a ceasefire. So what do Israelis believe? Is Sinwar's death, is it providing a path to an end in the fighting?
Well, President Biden called that an opportunity. Some people in Israel also called that an opportunity. But I guess it's more of a hope, not only or not exactly an opportunity, a hope that Hamas, after the killing of Yahya Sinwar, will now come to the realization that they will not win this war. They will not stay in power in Gaza, in post-war Gaza. And that's maybe the end of it, and release the hostages. But that's apparently, and if we listen closely to what Khalil al-Hayya, Sinwar's deputy, has said today, he promised to keep on fighting and that the hostages will not be released until the war ends. On the other hand, Israel says the war will not end until the hostages are released. So we have two points of view that are 100% in disagreement here. Israel doesn't want Hamas to stay in power, and Hamas wants exactly the opposite, to stay in power and declare victory in post-war Gaza, and this will not be resolved, not even soon. And Kirby even said today, the U.S. official, as well as President Biden, just minutes before this interview, told Reuters that this is not going to be easy, and that's apparently going to be the case. It's not going to be easy. Hamas still stubborn, still insisting that Israel withdraws from Gaza, something that I don't think that this government or any other government actually will accept in Israel.
I've got about a minute left, but I want to get this question into you. The relatives of the hostages who are still in Gaza, what have they said about the news of Sinwar's killing?
Well, you're right. After the news yesterday, the families of the hostages, their supporters, of course, went to demonstrate in Tel Aviv, in the heart of Tel Aviv. And that's maybe something that we should put an eye on, because on one hand, they are congratulating the army that they have killed Sinwar, the one that is responsible for the killing and the kidnapping of their loved ones. But on the other hand, they are seeing this is not the achievement that they are looking for. The real victory for Israel is bringing back the hostages. That's obvious from their point of view, of course, and families of the hostages, as well as the forum that unites the families of the hostages, put out a statement saying that this will not end, that the victory will not be reached until the hostages are back. Yeah. So they are congratulating for this happening, but on the other hand, they are not seeing it as an achievement. It's only after their loved ones got back to Israel.
Journalist Balig Sladeen with the latest from Tel Aviv tonight. Balig, thank you.